The honourable member for York South Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is long due for its amendments, and I'm glad we're doing that. But I wanted to give you some historical context to how these kinds of things came about. I was witness to the Mississauga train derailment, which happened in November of 1979, and saw out my front window of my house rail cars rising 200 feet in the air as they exploded, 3 of them, and fell back to the ground, and was also part of the largest peacetime evacuation of anywhere in the world, as the community of Mississauga was evacuated for fear that a rail car of chlorine was going to escape into the community. And I raise this because essentially some of the safety regimens that we now have in place have been created as a result of horrific accidents, rather than the other way around. Rather than preventing horrific accidents with safety regulations, we wait till there is one, and then we bring in regulation. And I think that's a little bit backwards. The other piece of this puzzle that was created as a result of the Mississauga train derailment was the notion that why are we transporting huge quantities of very dangerous goods through residential neighborhoods? We shouldn't be doing that. And so the Liberal government of the time put forward something called the Railway Relocation Act and suggested that the government would help railroads move their operations out of heavily built-up areas and into more rural areas. And in fact, there was a lot of money spent by that Liberal government on moving CN rails, big yards, out of the city of Toronto and into an area quite a ways north that is now completely devoid of housing in the area around it. However, the Conservative government of Prime Minister Mulroney then withdrew the funding. The Act's still on the books. There's just no money attached to it. So we have this notion that it's maybe a bad idea to have freight trains running through densely populated areas, but we're not prepared to do anything about it. And as the recent derailment of the Via train only shows, that anything that was anywhere near that set of rail cars, as they collided into buildings, anybody that was living nearby was in grave danger. And that's still the case. Even after we pass this Railway Safety Act, we still have the specter of huge, we're talking 2-mile-long freight trains rumbling through cities like Toronto and right through my community, right through our neighborhood. It has gone now from the sublime to the ridiculous in my neighborhood. The GO Transit folks are building an underpass under a couple of roads, and in order for their trains, and their trains are right next door to a CP rail corridor. In order to protect their trains from a possible CP rail derailment, they're building a crash barrier wall between the 2 sets of tracks. Now, the houses are closer, but nobody's thinking of putting a crash barrier wall anywhere along the corridor between the rail cars and the houses. But we've got to protect our infrastructure, this little trench that we're building. CN has to protect that, not CN. GO Transit has to protect that by building a crash barrier wall. That makes the residents of my neighborhood realize just how dangerous it is when a big company like GO Transit says we got to protect our investment by building a wall to keep freight trains from hitting us. But those people that live right alongside that corridor, whose land was expropriated in order to put the corridor there, closer to their homes, are now quite reasonably worried, because that worry is for their personal well-being, their safety, the safety of their children, the safety of their houses. A couple of years ago, a train in Montreal derailed, and that train actually leveled a house. Now, luckily, no one was in it. No one was injured. But we're not actually pretending that we're going to pass any regulations in this bill to protect people from that, to protect people from that consequence. In this bill actually gives the government considerable power to pass regulations. And those regulations are, in fact, what will determine how safe our railroads are. The bill actually does do some very good things in determining how those regulations will be put into place. But it's the regulations themselves that we must hold the government's feet to the fire on to make sure that those regulations are actually effective and that they're administered properly by this government. I'll give you the example of the recent derailment of the Via Rail train in Burlington. Had there been positive train control on that train, that accident would not have happened, because the train would have been slowed down automatically if the driver or the driver's assistant had not paid attention to the signals. That system is in full use in Europe now, and it's how all trains are managed in Europe. It is being implemented in the United States starting in 2015, but they have been given notice since 2009 that this is coming, so as of 2015, all rail systems, in particular passenger rail systems that share space with freight, must have positive train control. CP and CN travel into the U.S., as does Via Rail. Are they going to have to retrofit their vehicles to be capable of positive train control because they're operating in the U.S.? And therefore, why aren't we doing it here in Canada? It makes no sense. That is available through regulation. The government could, in fact, pass that regulation, and I'll read the act, that the governor and council may make regulations to respect the implementation as a result of a risk management analysis of the remedial action required to maintain the highest level of safety. Well, the highest level of safety is positive train control. And the highest level of safety is what we should be striving for. We should not be striving for something that is below the highest level of safety, and worldwide, that level of safety is what has become standard, and we are the outlier. We are not the highest level of safety. And as was proved, unfortunately, with the death of 3 Via Rail employees 2 weeks ago, that highest level of safety does not apply to Canada, with tragic, tragic consequences. The parliamentary secretary commented on the fact that rail companies have to get a certificate before they can actually operate. I'm aware of at least one rail company that is starting up in Canada that was given an exemption by the Canadian Transportation Authority and will not require a certificate and will therefore not be bound by this legislation. And that's the air rail link that they're building from Pearson Airport to Union Station. Now, why it was given an exemption from having to have a certificate, I really can't answer, because the Canadian Transportation Agency sometimes acts in mysterious ways. It was a private company, and we have, again, the parliamentary secretary suggesting that private companies should be free to run their businesses, but we have, as a public duty, to make sure that we implement safety regulations that protect the public. But you can't do that if you give them exemptions. If you exempt them from being a railroad under the Canadian Transportation Agency, then who then provides the safety? How does that happen? I'm being told I have 1 minute. The other piece of the puzzle, of course, is voice recorders in train cabs. They're not a piece of safety equipment per se, but they are an effective way of determining exactly what happens so we can make the system safer later. The train cabs currently have speed control recorders, and in conversations I've had with the drivers, they all know that those recorders are there and that they can be fired for violating the speed control that is effective on the pieces of track they're on, and it's clear that their bosses can figure out exactly how fast they were going at any given time. So they pay close attention to what their speed should be as a result of there being a speed recorder. The same would be true of a voice recorder. They would pay much closer attention to what is said and done in the cab and focus on their job more. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to speak on this bill.